Et nous allons commencer. Donc je vous dis bonjour et je vous remercie de votre présence pour cette table ronde sur l'hydrogène renouvelable. Alors, je crois que tout le monde ne m'entend pas, tout le monde n'a pas encore son casque. Et oui, nous commençons à l'heure pile. Je vous invite à mettre votre casque si vous souhaitez m'entendre. Est-ce que vous m'entendez d'ailleurs avec le casque? Oui, c'est bon? Voilà. Est-ce que les personnes derrière vous, vous pouvez leur dire qu'on a commencé? Alors, parce que les gens qui n'ont pas leur casque ne peuvent pas savoir qu'on a commencé. Voilà, c'est juste pour vous signaler. Parfait. Donc, merci beaucoup pour votre présence à cette table ronde sur les mobilités à hydrogène et l'hydrogène renouvelable pour décarboner les mobilités dans les territoires. Donc c'est un vaste sujet. Nous allons parler d'écosystèmes renouvelables, hydrogène renouvelable dans 2 territoires en particulier. Nous allons parler aussi du coût de ce type de mobilité décarbonée à l'hydrogène, des modèles économiques possibles. Mais avant tout, nous avons l'honneur d'accueillir pour ouvrir cette table ronde Monsieur Bernard Gilabert. Donc, vous êtes chargé de mission hydrogène auprès de Carole Delga, donc la présidente de la région Occitanie. Et vous allez pouvoir nous expliquer pourquoi et comment, en fait, en quelques mots, l'Occitanie est vraiment en pointe de l'hydrogène renouvelable pour la mobilité. Monsieur Gilabert.
Bonjour mesdames, bonjour messieurs.
Good afternoon, ladies and
Je vais faire une
gentlemen.
introduction très courte.
I will make a very brief
La région
introduction.
Occitanie s'est préoccupée
The Occitanie region has been interested in hydrogen since 2015 and worked, first of all, to structure this sector with the services, with the development agencies, the economic development
le
agencies,
groupe qu'elle a créé à
and the
l'intérieur,
group
qui est le groupe IDEO, qui
created
anime la
within
filière
the
hydrogène.
IDEO group,
Il y a
which
aussi
organises
l'Agence
the
régionale
hydrogen
d'énergie
sector.
qui
There's
est un
also
outil
the
pour
Energy
le montage de
Climate
projets
Agency, which is a
publics-privés en
tool for
particulier. Et
project
ça, c'est intéressant.
development,
Alors,
public
sur
and
l'approche de la
private.
filière, je vais
So,
faire très
with
court
regard
parce
to
qu'on
the
va pas faire
approach of
une
the
leçon de
sector, I
physique
will
sur
be very brief because we
l'hydrogène
won't
et
give
l'énergie,
you a
c'est
physics
forcément
lesson on
une
hydrogen, but
approche globale
it
de
is
la chaîne
necessarily a global
d'énergie,
approach to the
avec,
energy chain
production,
with
stockage,
production,
distribution,
storage,
transport,
distribution, and
et
transport.
usage. Et dès lors qu'on parle de
to the end user.
l'usage,
And when we're talking about
on regarde quels
usage,
sont les grands champs d'usage
we
de
look at what
l'hydrogène.
the
On le
main
sait, c'est
fields of
la
usage of hydrogen
décarbonation
are. We
de
know that it's
l'industrie.
decarboning of
On n'en a pas
industry.
trop en Occitanie.
We
Alors,
don't
on
have
a-
too much
il y a
industry in
d'autres régions
Occitanie.
qui
There are
travaillent,
other
et puis il y a
regions
des
that
industries privées qui
work
travaillent
and
beaucoup.
private enterprises
Ça se
that work
développe. Je
a
pense
lot with this. It's
qu'on a quand même une société
developing
qui travaille
fast.
aussi, c'est la société Bulan.
There's the
dans
Bulan
ce
company
domaine-là.
also
La
that
deuxième
works in this
usage,
field.
c'est
The second
l'hydrogène
usage
combustion.
is
L'hydrogène
as
combustion,
fuel.
c'est un champ qui
And that
porte un avenir,
is
un grand avenir, y
has a
compris
very
pour la
bright
mobilité.
future,
Je crois que ça, c'est
including for
important
mobility.
de le savoir.
I think it's
Et
very
puis il
important
y
to
a les
underline this.
mobilités
And then
qui
there
aujourd'hui, au
is
départ ont été traitées à
mobility,
partir
which
de l'électricité, la mobilité
used to
électrique.
run on
Comment on peut
electricity.
faire des prolongateurs d'autonomie,
And the
mais
question
aussi
is how
comment
we
on
can
peut,
extend their
grâce à la
autonomy
pile
and
combustible,
how,
avoir,
thanks to
une énergie
the
disponible
fuel
pour
cell, we can
les
have energy
Clairement,
available for
ça a été
cars
vrai un petit peu
or
partout
vehicles.
en Europe
Well,
et
this
dans le
is true
monde.
in
On s'est
Europe and the
d'abord
world. We
préoccupé
first of
des
all
transports en commun, des
took
bus,
care of public transport,
plus tard des
buses,
cars,
and then
des
later
RER,
on
des trains, des bateaux.
city
On
buses,
se préoccupe
trains,
aussi des
buses,
avions.
also
Et c'est vrai
planes.
que,
And
on avance assez doucement.
it's true that we are moving ahead very
que
slowly
peut-être
for various reasons
nos interlocuteurs
that
tout à l'heure
our speakers later on
préciseront un certain
will
nombre
be
de raisons.
able to
Par contre, on y
explain.
croit parce que,
But we do believe in
que ça
it
soit sous la
because,
forme
be it in the
électrique,
form
que
of
ça soit sous la
electricity
forme
or
énergie,
energy
carburant, je dirais,
or
hein,
fuel,
l'hydrogène
hydrogen,
doit faire partie, nous sommes convaincus de ça, la région Occitanie.
the Occitanie region is convinced that hydrogen must be part of the energy mix
Je n'irai pas plus loin dans l'introduction
and must count for 20% or
de
beyond.
cette table ronde parce que
So I won't
les acteurs qui vont venir
develop
sur
things any
le
further
plateau
because the speakers
vont
who will
avoir
be on
beaucoup plus de
stage
choses à dire que moi.
have a lot
Je
more
dirais
to say than
simplement
I
que
do. I would simply say that we remain active and we have reflection plans on captive fleets of light vehicles for the final kilometers because there remains work to be done in this area. I will stop there for this introduction. I think that the best is to pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci Monsieur Bernard
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernard Gilabert.
Envie d'en savoir plus.
It really makes us want to learn more about the use of renewable hydrogen for transport.
Alors, avant de commencer, je voudrais vous informer.
Before we start, I would like to inform you that at 4:30 p.m. at the end of this roundtable,
je vous informe de, si vous pouvez, de rester parce que
please stay if you can, because we're lucky enough to have Mr. Sneeber, who is president of Green Hydrogen Morocco, which is the Moroccan Green Hydrogen Center. He's going to talk about renewable hydrogen. He will be speaking between 4:30 and 4:45 p.m. maximum. So please do stay if you can.
En attendant, donc place à l'hydrogène renouvelable.
Meanwhile, let's look at renewable hydrogen in France. So for this roundtable, we have Antonin Charon for CEDEV, the Vendée Energy Union, Mathieu Copper for France Hydrogen. I will introduce you more specifically later on. Then Christelle Guillon for the AREC, the Regional Agency for Energy and Climate of Occitanie, and Christelle Martinez for Hynamics, a subsidiary of EDF that works on decarbon and low-carbon hydrogen.
Très bien. Alors, pour commencer,
so to begin,
donc on va déjà on parle d'hydrogène vert. Donc moi,
so we're talking about green hydrogen. I would like to understand what this is all about when we say green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, low carbon or decarbonated hydrogen. What are we talking about?
Et je laisse la parole
and I will leave the floor now to Mathieu Copper, who is a project manager on relationships with territories for France Hydrogen. And France Hydrogen is an association that brings together 450 stakeholders of the French hydrogen sector along the whole value chain. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, we're going to begin by trying to understand the terms, in particular the colors of hydrogen. You can see on the screen the rainbow of hydrogen. So in France Hydrogen, we don't necessarily use the proper color code because we favor terminology of renewable and low carbon energy. That's why we don't necessarily talk about red, green, blue hydrogen. We talk about renewable hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen. And in order to have a renewable or low carbon qualification, this hydrogen must, when it's produced, emit less than 3.33 kilograms of equivalent CO2 per kilo of hydrogen produced. So I'd like to clarify that the round table is on renewable hydrogen. There is a difference between renewable and low carbon. Yes, I'm coming to that. So just to clarify, out of 3.38 kilograms of equivalent CO2 per kilo of hydrogen produced, it is not a figure that we've pulled out of a top hat. It is a European regulation that dates back to the 10th of February 2023 and that was transposed into French regulations by a law dating back of the 1st of July of the same year, 2024, and which establishes this threshold of emissions to produce hydrogen. So as you say, Carol, what is the difference between renewable hydrogen and low-carbon hydrogen? Well, renewable hydrogen, here I will be focusing essentially on hydrogen produced by water electrolysis, which is most of the projects for current projects for the production of hydrogen in France and across the world. So water electrolysis, using renewable energies, solar, photovoltaic and wind, will yield renewable hydrogen. And all of the rest, everything that's produced by non-renewable electricity, I'm thinking in particular in France with the French energy mix and in particular the nuclear industry, we call this low-carbon hydrogen. But in France Hydrogen, we're fighting to transform carbon hydrogen, which concerns 95% of hydrogen production across the world to turn it into low-carbon hydrogen, and in the best case.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Et alors, quels sont les avantages
Yes,
justement
thank
de
you. What are the
l'hydrogène
advantages of renewable
pour la
hydrogen
mobilité?
for
Alors,
mobility?
la mobilité, de quelle mobilité on
And
parle
what mobility we're
justement?
talking about?
Alors, on parle de
Absolutely, we're
mobilité
talking
lourde et
about
intensive pour
heavy
l'hydrogène, parce que
intensive
c'est
mobility for hydrogen
le
because
mieux.
that's where it's the
On a
most
identifié
relevant. We've identified
trois avantages,
three
trois atouts principaux
main
pour
advantages
la
for
mobilité
hydrogen
en ce qui concerne
mobility,
essentiellement la mobilité lourde et intensive.
mostly for heavy and intensive mobility. I would like to announce that at France Hydrogen we're not against, we don't oppose electric battery mobility and hydrogen mobility. We believe that there will be complementarity in the future, an energy mix for mobility depending on usage.
Pour ce qui concerne l'hydrogène, on pense que l'hydrogène est beaucoup plus adéquat lorsqu'il s'agit de mobilité lourde et intensive, parce qu'il y a trois, comme
Alors
je vous ai dit.
pourquoi, oui.
Voilà. On a un temps d'avitaillement court. Donc pour les véhicules personnels, on a 3 à 5 minutes pour faire un plein d'hydrogène pour un véhicule léger. Donc ça se prête particulièrement bien pour notamment les taxis. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des franciliens ou parisiens dans la salle. Moi, il ne se passe pas un jour à Paris sans voir 2 ou 3 taxis des sociétés Hype ou Asietco qui roulent à hydrogène, sachant qu'il y en a plus de 1000 aujourd'hui qui roulent en région parisienne. Ça se prête aussi bien pour les véhicules utilitaires légers, pour les véhicules d'urgence. Je pense notamment aux pompiers, aux SAMU qui n'ont pas le luxe d'attendre plusieurs heures de faire le plein d'une batterie et donc qui ont l'obligation d'avoir un temps d'avitaillement plutôt court. On a aussi une charge utile plus importante avec des technologies embarquées plus légères. Quand je parle de technologie embarquée, je parle de la pile à combustible la plupart du temps et du réservoir. Et cette technologie est beaucoup plus légère que les batteries et nécessite donc moins de puissance pour faire rouler le véhicule. Et enfin, une autonomie et une puissance supérieure avec en moyenne des piles à combustible qui ont 2 fois plus d'autonomie que des véhicules à batterie. Et donc là, ça se prête beaucoup plus ça se prête d'autant mieux pour tout ce qui est transport routier, transport de marchandises, pour ce qui est bus, autocars, les autocars qui font les fameux autocars Macron par exemple, qui roulent à plus de 300 km par jour et donc avec une autonomie accrue. Là, je vous ai proposé une gamme de véhicules qui n'est pas du tout exhaustive, mais qui roule. On parle de mobilité hydrogène, c'est pas la mobilité de demain, c'est une mobilité qui a commencé aujourd'hui, qui a même commencé hier, on le verra notamment avec des exemples aujourd'hui. Des mobilités qui roulent et des gammes qui ont une tendance à s'étoffer au fur et à mesure. Vous en avez quelques exemples là, avec des bus, des bennes à ordures ménagères, des autocars qui aujourd'hui sont rétrofités, donc c'est-à-dire qu'on a changé la motorisation pour les passer en motorisation hydrogène, mais on va avoir une gamme d'autocars neuves dès l'année prochaine. Voilà, vous avez un exemple ici, je ne vais pas mettre en
Merci beaucoup Mathieu Cooper pour cette introduction, en tout cas ces fondamentaux, ce rappel des fondamentaux. Et j'aimerais laisser la parole maintenant à Antonin Charon. Donc, vous êtes chargé de projet Pôle Innovation Expertise pour le CIDEV, qui est le syndicat d'énergie de la Vendée. Alors la Vendée, je crois, a mis en place assez très tôt un écosystème hydrogène vert renouvelable pour la mobilité. Et vous allez nous expliquer comment, pourquoi, tout nous dire en 5 minutes.
Bonjour à tous, donc Antonin Charon du CIDEV. Effectivement, le CIDEV a mis en place une politique et une volonté de déploiement de l'hydrogène en Vendée, avec une thématique importante qui était celle de produire et de consommer localement. Depuis 2010, on développe la mobilité au CIDEV, donc avec les IRV au début, ensuite le gaz vert, donc avec le GNV, avec des productions via des méthaniseurs. Et donc en 2017-2018, il y a une volonté des élus locaux, c'est important de le préciser parce que ces projets aujourd'hui fonctionnent grâce à ces élus, de mettre en place une distribution d'hydrogène, mais une distribution d'hydrogène vert. Et donc c'est Life, le producteur d'hydrogène vert, qui est venu s'installer à Bouin, donc sur la côte vendéenne, avec un électrolyseur donc de 750 kW, c'est la fenêtre du milieu. Et la particularité de cet électrolyseur, c'est qu'il est raccordé en direct sur des éoliennes qui appartiennent à Vendée Énergie. Vendée Énergie, c'est une SEM, une société d'économie mixte qui appartient en partie au CIDEV. Et donc les 3 éoliennes qui sont sorties de tarifs d'achat de DFOA ont été raccordées en direct au site. Donc là, on a une production d'hydrogène vert à partir d'énergie éolienne. Une fois qu'on produit cet hydrogène, il est à peu près à 300 bars. Voilà, c'est un terme technique, mais il est à peu près à 300 bars et on le transporte vers les stations de distribution multi-énergie, donc avec une partie hydrogène. Donc là, cette fois, la distribution est portée par le SIDEV sur un investissement du syndicat. En fonction du maillage qu'on verra juste après, l'hydrogène est transporté par véhicule GNV. Donc on a voulu maintenir cette boucle verte sur le territoire. Et nous, on va le monter jusqu'à 700 bars sur 2 de nos stations pour distribuer à tout type de véhicules. Donc on l'a vu juste avant, les véhicules légers ou des véhicules lourds comme des bus. L'avantage, c'est que le plein se fait relativement vite. C'est-à-dire que sur un véhicule léger, on est à peu près à 1 minute au kilogramme. Sur une Miraille, un véhicule léger, on est à peu près à 5 minutes le plein. Et pour un bus, en 15 minutes, on a fait la recharge. Voilà un petit peu le maillage départemental. On a donc 3 stations qui appartiennent au SIDEV, c'est les flèches bleues. 2 stations 200 kg jour, donc refroidies à 700 bars. Donc là, on est sur un refroidissement à moins 40 degrés, donc un peu plus de technologie. C'est des stations qui ont un peu plus de suivi.
And this requires a little bit more monitoring. So the first was the refueling station that was on the top right. And there was the will to produce and consume the 3 energies. And then we have the station of the Sabdelon, which was identical. And then on the bottom left, you have a station which is at Saint-Gilles de Croix-de-Vie, which is not cooled, and it takes the vehicles up to 350 bars because there are only feeds 2
ce système-là.
Bins at the moment, so we need to cool that system. There are also private stakeholders who've come to market and have decided to set up their station.
Au niveau des stations, vous avez
it's the Station Marché, so there are 2 stations which are HRS technology. You have the Saint-Gilles technology, which is Attaway technology, and the Marché station.
Et donc la production de bois qui est l'hydrogène vert.
Voilà which is green hydrogen. So that is how we cover the territory.
Pour tout vous dire, on avait une 4e station qui
we had a 4th station which was planned in Chalon, but given the volume and usages planned initially,
pour le moment, elle est un petit peu en stand-by.
It's been put on standby because the important for us is what you have before your eyes, is to multiply the usages.
Autour des années 2020.
So when we launched around the 2000s, a bit beforehand, we needed to make the technology more reliable and find a stakeholder that was ready to support us to get these stations up and running and have 100% availability. Today we have 98, 99% availability, and that's essential because a hydrogen vehicle that doesn't refuel in our stations then just leaves. So the priority is to maintain operations. So here you have the vehicle ecosystem. There are vehicles that work throughout the territory. We have about 30 or so vehicles for daily consumption of 130 kilos. So these figures are changing constantly. We double, triple, or quadruple our usage per year. But the important thing for us is here, we try to massify usage, and the ADEME is helping us with the program of funding vehicles within companies of the territory. So we help them to set up the case, and we look for funds for them. So the interest is to find more and more fuel, more hydrogen vehicles.
Synthétique et vraiment intéressante.
Thank you for this summary presentation, which was very interesting of what is done in Vendée. And now we will pass the floor to Christelle Martinez. No, sorry, Christelle Guillon, of course. Because now I'd like to know what's going on in Occitanie. We've had a taster, thanks to Mr. Ginabert. So Christelle Guillon, you're in charge of mobility and renewable gases at the AREC, which is the Regional Agency for Climate and Energy in Occitanie, and which is the investment organization for the region for all of this type of action. So can you explain how, through the AREC, Occitanie manages renewable hydrogen for mobility? I think you're going to talk to us about 2 main projects, the iPort and the H2 corridor project. Yes, hello. So the Occitanie region voted a green hydrogen plan in 2019, 250 million euros.
parmi les
And
actions qui sont
among
vraiment portées
the
là-dessus,
actions
c'est la création
carried by
d'écosystèmes
this was the creation
hydrogène,
of the
avec,
hydrogen
comme je disais tout à l'heure,
ecosystem
production, distribution
with the
et
production,
usage.
distribution, and
Et
usage of
Le
hydrogen.
premier projet
The first project
qu'on a en région Occitanie,
in
c'est le
the
projet
Occitanie
IPOR,
region is the
situé à Toulouse-Blagnac,
iPort project in
donc
Toulouse-Blagnac,
qui est une SPV,
which
société de
is
projet, créée
a
en partenariat entre Engie et l'AREC,
project company created
et
between
qui est
Engie and AREC,
station de production
and
de
which is
1
a
mégawatt,
production
un électrolyseur
station
d'un
of
mégawatt
an electrolyzer that allows us to produce up to 400 kilos of
et puis,
renewable
la
hydrogen per
spécificité
day. And the
ce véritable hub hydrogène, c'est qu'il y a 2 stations de
is that
distribution.
there are 2
Donc,
distribution
sur la
stations.
vue d'en haut qu'on voit
So
en bas
at
à
the
gauche,
top and
on
at the
voit d'un
bottom
côté à
left, we
droite,
can
il y
see
a
on
une
one hand on the
station
right
qui est
there
sur
is
le
the
tarmac
first station,
de
which is
l'aéroport, donc
on the
qui permet
tarmac of the
d'accéder
airport,
aux usages qui sont directement
and
sur la zone aéroportuaire.
which supplies the
la
airport
station qu'on
zone.
voit à gauche,
And the
c'est,
station we see on the
une
left
station en zone
is
publique.
in public
Et donc,
area.
en plus, il y a
And
une
in
zone
addition,
qui
there
permet
is
de
a
faire de
zone
l'import ou de
that
l'export
allows us
d'hydrogène.
to import or
Donc, voilà,
export
c'est
hydrogen.
vraiment un hub hydrogène qui, donc aujourd'hui, donc vous demandiez,
So
c'est l'hydrogène vert parce que du coup,
it is green hydrogen because the electricity used to produce it is
donc, produite soit par des barrages
produced either
hydroélectriques
by hydroelectric
en région,
dams
des PPA,
or
des Power Purchase Agreement avec
power
un
purchase
ferme
agreements with an agrovoltaic farm in the
Un
Aude.
contrat d'achat
It is also
d'électricité
regional.
privée entre
So it's
vous en fait et puis
a
producteur
contract
d'énergie
between
renouvelable solaire.
you and a solar energy
et
producer,
donc, du
yes.
coup, voilà, donc des stations à la fois
And
350
so we
et
have 360 and 350 and 700 bar stations.
5 autobus.
So today we fuel 5
opérés par Transdev.
coaches operated by Transdev. So first of all, for the Toulouse-Blagnac airport to transport passengers to the airport, and 3 buses which are used for the Airbus employees.
Donc c'est la première station.
So that is the first
sur
station in the Toulouse metropolis.
Pouvoir expérimenter sur cette station.
And so to experiment in the station, we know that there are usages with Toulouse metropolis because they have put out a call for tender for Fenwicks or light vehicles or road sweepers or dust carts.
Voilà. La station n'attend plus que les usages.
So the station is just waiting for the users.
Pour la station qui se trouve sur.
So that's the first station that is in Blagnac.
Et
Right.
donc un autre gros projet porté en région, c'est le projet Corridor H2.
So another project is the Corridor H2 region, which is carried by the region to decarbon mobility and heavy transport, and therefore passengers and travellers. So here you can see the map of the region,
qui rassemble deux
which brings together
two
hydrogen production sites, one in Life Bessia, which is 5 megawatts, so 5 times bigger than iPort in Toulouse, which is operational. We will be delivering the first trailers this week. And then HyDoc, which will be commissioned next year with 20 megawatts, so very big sites, and this will provide the region with a concrete production, which is very significant. So what type of vehicle will you be fueling here? Well, that's the production side of things. And it should fuel, including the network of stations. Those are the blue squares. So you can see the objective is to have stations spread throughout the region. So we're reasoning at the level of the region. The 3 first one has just been created. There's Saint-Sulpice in the Tarn, Béziers middle of next year, and Narbonne at the end of next year. What is important to understand about this model for the creation of this ecosystem is that the project is carried by the region, and therefore each is carried by an SPV, a specifically created company with public-private partnership. And so we work with LiveDoc and EDOC Care, and even with 7 distribution.
Une SPV, une société de projet.
The SPV is a project company created specifically for each station.
Voilà, donc Saint-Sulpice devrait.
So Saint-Sulpice should be operational at the beginning of next year. Béziers, the building permit has been obtained. We started work. For what type of
Alors,
usage?
les usages ciblés au départ, c'était beaucoup les camions. Pour le
So
transport
to begin with, it
de-
was for
de
trucks,
marchandises.
for
On sait que
freight
les camions
goods
prennent un
transport.
peu plus de temps à arriver que.
But that's taking a little bit more time than we thought.
Voilà. Et également les
And
autocars. Ça,
also
c'est,
coaches.
La région aussi qui s'est
And the
impliquée, qui a-
region has
sur le rétrofit de
really
trottoirs dont on
decided to
parlait, qui en a déjà
retrofit
deux,
its coaches, and so
dans le Tarn.
there are two that have already been
Mais du coup,
retrofitted in the
effectivement,
town.
sur
But
Report, c'est également pareil.
for iPod, it's the same thing. The idea is to really address all usages and typically light intensive mobility, which is very relevant to use hydrogen. Are they stations that are open to the public? Yes, absolutely, because they're the winner of a European project, and it's one of the conditions is that the stations be public. Blagnac is also public. Yes, absolutely. Because I imagine that you can't go onto the tarmac. No, not on the tarmac, but it is public. And same question for hydrogen, which is also renewable. Where does it come from? Which renewable source? Oh, where would it? So, Life Bessier, it's the Life company that has global public-private attributions to feed its sites. So it's rather wind and solar. And that of Port La Nouvelle, well, there's solar directly and the public-private acquisitions which are working on the negotiations. So renewable electricity also to supply the electrolyzers to produce this hydrogen. Yes, and then there's the usage. We talked about it a little. So just to say that the idea is really to demonstrate and make available vehicles that are already available. So be it on the iPort side, the idea would be to create an event day in 2025 so that those who are interested in these available vehicles come and see us. And similarly, in Narbonne, mid-January, we will be doing something with DHOC to bring together the potential users of our hydrogen.
Merci.
So that we have vehicles and we can use them. So thank you very much. And that is one of the challenges of hydrogen mobility. We've seen that these are the usages.
De gens qui utilisent des véhicules à hydrogène.
So there are people who use hydrogen mobility, but one of the obstacles is the cost because it is a new technology. And so, for the time being, the cost is quite high. So I'm now going to ask Christelle Martinez for Dynamics. You are in charge of the development of Grand Sud for Animix, which is the EDF subsidiary dedicated to low-carbon hydrogen solutions and decarbon hydrogen solutions and renewables. So for Animix, you have an idea of what the local authorities are doing because you have a lot of partnerships. You'll be talking to us about those, but you're aware of this cost barrier. Yes, the cost of hydrogen. So today, and as you've understood, we're at the very beginning of hydrogen. In recent years, we've been initiating projects, and now they're up and running, but we must continue to work in this direction. And like any high technology sector that is not mature, the sector needs support because it's still costly, because there are questions around R&D, because we began our projects with small-scale projects to begin with 750 kilowatts. Now we're looking at 5 megawatts for mobility, and we need to get over a hurdle in that area to be increasingly competitive in terms of the cost of hydrogen. But yes, it does remain costly. So how much does it cost? Well, I took the France hydrogen references so that I don't make any mistakes. For example, if we compare the cost of hydrogen as compared to the cost of diesel for transport, hydrogen is between 90 and 100 euros for 100 kilometers. And if we take hydrogen at 12.5 euros, and that's what you said, a bus needs 8.5 liters. It's between 90 and 100 euros for 100 kilometers with hydrogen, compared to diesel, where today it's between 35 and 40 euros for 100 kilometers. So we can see that it's more expensive. expensive.
Mais je pense qu'il ne faut pas
But I
appréhender
don't think that we
l'hydrogène. Bien
should
sûr qu'il faut appréhender
be
l'hydrogène
afraid,
par le coût, mais pas seulement.
look at hydrogen through the cost angle. Of course, through the cost angle, but also we need to look at all of the advantages of this new sector on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, on the health benefits, but it's something that remains costly in terms of production, and the vehicles.
Les poids lourds,
Because, you know, heavy-duty trucks
aujourd'hui, c'est bien plus compliqué, bien plus
with hydrogen fuel is far more technological and complicated to build
et un poids lourd diesel encore
heavy-duty truck that runs with a fuel cell rather than a diesel engine. So it costs between 550,000 euros for a hydrogen heavy-duty truck, whereas with diesel it's about 150, something like that.
Par contre, il y a des accompagnements,
But there is support, there are subsidies, which can reduce the cost of a heavy-duty truck by about 50%, but it does remain more costly today. It is a sector that needs support because it's not yet mature, and we must continue to work and you know, have larger scale projects that will become more profitable more quickly. But today, the cost of H2 is greater, and the cost of the vehicles also.
Which is good news over the years. And it's on a trend to go lower. So I'm going to ask you now, Antonin, all these initiatives are from CDEV, so I'm not going to ask France Hydrogen what they think, but what's your feedback and your experience from CDEV? Can you confirm these orders of magnitude, let's say? Yes, in particular for buses, I would just add, be more precise for buses. This is a new technology, true, but to reassure you, on the 4 or 5 buses in the department, running in the department today, when they broke down, it wasn't because of the hydrogen. It was they had broken windows or there was something else, and the logistics are also more difficult because we don't have a lot of parts in place. But the hydrogen for vehicles today really functions well, but then we've got it more reliable throughout the supply chain for our vehicles. We are at 15 euros per kilo delivered at the gas pump. For a lightweight vehicle, it's 5 kilograms of hydrogen. You can do the math. It's about 80 euros to have a full tank. And you can go 500 kilometers on a lightweight vehicle like a car. Of course, when we're talking about buses or heavy-duty trucks, and depending on the gas station, that would cost about 2 million euros, with a little bit less with the financing. In Roche-sur-Yon, we were financed up to 80% by different subsidiaries. And I'm going to stop there. So when we're talking about the price of the buses, is this the same cost as like heavy goods trucks or semi-trucks? Yeah, it's same ratio, but there are subsidies. Great. Thank you for focusing on costs. So there's another challenge for renewable hydrogen for mobility, which are vehicles, the availability of vehicles. And I would like to speak to Mathieu from France Hydrogen. Can you give us a few ideas? So there are already buses running on hydrogen in France. There are filled trucks, but tell us what's on the streets, where is it, where are the stations? So we have ecosystems that exist, and I would like to highlight, as my colleagues said, we're going to talk about the ecosystem, but it's very important to talk about the ecosystem in its totality for mobility, because it's an entire ecosystem from the gas station to the use, and we're lacking usage, and we think that local authorities, with this technology that's not yet mature, but that's heading in that direction. We've gone through this step, the testing phase, and now we're not in an experimental phase anymore. We're in a pre-industrialization phase. And to get past this phase, we need local authorities via the public request will allow us to get over this hump from industrialization and allow this sector to grow. Today, we have, so these maps from beginning of October However, today we have 60 buses about circulating in France. You can see them on the blue dots. Important to note, those are the hydrogen buses with different brands. Vanoul, unfortunately, went under at the beginning of the year. Their buses are still being used, but unfortunately, that company will no longer, Vanoul will no longer sell Vanoul buses because they've, but we have Solaris or Sofrac, and they are from Albi. So there's about 60 buses. We have more than 250 buses that are going to be delivered in 2026, 2027, and others still to be delivered in other local authorities in other cities, and you can see what's being planned. If we continue on to the next slide, you'll see that we've got other types of mobility, other types of vehicles. Oh, no, we're missing a slide. So let's talk about the stations. The stations are really at the heart of this ecosystem. My colleague from the CDEV said it very well. And in Occitanie, it was said, today we have 83 stations for hydrogen that are up and running, and 107 that are planned. We are lucky in France to have two builders of stations, and I'm going to name them. I was also speaking of Cheres and Tawek, who are building and maintaining these stations. And in France, we're lucky because they're in Auvergne and Rhône-Alpes, and we're very lucky to have this French technology that's present here today to constitute the heart of this ecosystem within our different regions in hydrogen. So you've got to go visit them. You've got to go see them. If the local authorities, if any local authorities here listening, don't hesitate to go see them, because you can start to build your hydrogen ecosystem for mobility. You can see here a few examples of hydrogen stations. There are 83. I could only choose 4 to show you. I apologize for that. But you can see that there's a certain number of existing stations, and we've got to move forward. Thank you.
Alors, la production, la distribution,
so for production, distribution, and consumption,
la question du prix,
and the question of the price, now let's talk about how can we finance this additional cost
actuelle pour la mobilité
for hydrogen mobility.
Je voudrais poser la question.
So I want to ask, I'm going to start with Christelle Martinez.
For Hynamix.
Vous
avez travaillé avec des
you worked with local authorities
dans le cadre de partenariats
in public-private partnerships.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous en donner quelques exemples?
Give us a few examples.
Oui, donc, juste pourquoi les collectivités locales
are committed to these projects
autour de l'hydrogène, c'est parce que
concerning hydrogen. It's because we really have to keep this in mind. Today, the world of transportation is 21% of carbon emissions in France, and the local authorities are most often the biggest stakeholders within their regions, within the economic actors, and also they're very committed to the energy transition. They're not just doing it for fun or just for greenwashing. Today there are challenges. They've got to reduce our greenhouse gases. There's public health issues. It links to transportation, and hydrogen is one of the answers to follow through with this ecological transition. And that's why local authorities are committed. And we as operators and producers of hydrogen, we need to have this support. And this is why we imagine these projects in France. We have 2 stations today that are being exploited for buses in Auxerre and Belfort. We have 3 projects where we had investments, and the building will start in 2025 in Cannes and Dunkirk and the south of the Parisian region. So these are industrial projects. Because, it's a whole hydrogen. If we're here to really create, to decarbonate the system, we've got to do it in the industrial region, also fuels, which are one object, one way where we can remove carbon, for example, from aviation and maritime industries. And why are we working with local authorities? Because they want to be true stakeholders in these local projects. I can speak about Dunkirk and Cannes. In Cannes, we've got a company we're working with, just as everybody does. And the local authority of Cannes it works with this company to work by our side and to see what we're doing, see what we were going to do. We're working in their region, we're working in their city, even if we're working with, we are operators, and even if we are also here to make money, the local authorities should be able to see what we're doing. And I think that's rather healthy. And this is an example of what's happening in other areas. So they're a part of this company, and we work together to reach our objectives, and that allows us to lower our costs, lower our investment, and that allows us to invest elsewhere, because obviously these are very costly projects.
Qui demandent énormément d'investissement.
They require a huge amount of investment. 2 megawatts cost between 15 and 20 million euros for just 2 megawatts.
Et donc c'est assez conséquent.
So it's huge. And these local authorities, to what percent do they give to these projects? For some local authorities, they go up to 20-25%.
Du capital,
of the total capital. Others, maybe 50%. In Belfort, the local authority, it's almost half and half. They're paying 50%. In Cannes, the commitment was quite high. There's also the local banks really are participating and really carrying their role to accompany these companies to deploy these exemplary projects. In Cannes, we also have the departmental council. To just be involved, to learn, to understand, and to commit further projects. So it's really exemplary to have the local authorities at our side. We need the subsidies, we need the financing, but I find that when we work together, well, that's what the AREC does. When they're by our side working on these projects, it's even more exemplary, whether it be for economic reasons or just for showing that we're all working together to reduce carbon in our regions. So in this case, local authorities are participating in financing the distribution on these stations. No, for the society, for the company building this, they participate in the globally.
Alors aujourd'hui, pour les projets qu'on a aujourd'hui, au début, Auxerre par exemple, c'est de l'électricité bas carbone.
This is low carbon energy because in 2019 when we initiated this project, we weren't speaking about renewable hydrogen.
Depuis cette année, on a signé un PPA
this last year, we signed a global PPA for 20 megawatts, which is going to allow all of our production mobility stations to be fed. We'll have a PPA, and then we'll be hydrogen renewable.
Des énergies renouvelables.
For all for PPA are always for renewable energies, but here we're talking about wind turbines. But ours is a global PPA, so we can, all of our stations could potentially have electricity from wind turbine power. So the production is done on location. Yes, you've got an electrolyzer per site, per station. For an electrolyzer that's 2 megawatts, that in there, in Cannes, for example, this will be able to charge about 40 buses. And Cannes really committed because they're changing all of their buses either to electric or hydrogen. So we can see how these different usages are so complementary. We're really talking about complementary use. Buses, electric buses, whether it be battery or polycombustible, fuel cell, or really removing carbon from mobility. So I think that when we talk about production, it's done differently because it's done directly in your hubs and then brought to the stations. Maybe that's just a slight difference. So what I wanted to ask you is, how did you find financing solutions? But you're in the station. There's always the production of hydrogen and then a hydrogen distribution system. So it's all on the same site, and it's on different sites. You can see, and then you transport the hydrogen. Yeah, for us, the hydrogen is not produced directly at the station. It's hydroged via an electrolyzer. But it's transported by the road in a container.
Dimension du transport supplémentaire.
So there's this kind of additional element of transportation. And at the CDEC, how did you finance?
En particulier les véhicules, enfin peut-être pas le CIDEV, mais
not necessarily CIDEV, but within this Vendée ecosystem? How did you finance these vehicles? So we don't finance the vehicles directly. We accompany the companies who want to invest. We get call for projects and we look for financing for them. It's rather complex. But it comes with the local desire. We do completely different to what they do. We own the stations 100%. They belong to CDEV, and we chose the technology. And internally, we're 2 or 3 people working on this. In particular, we built the ecosystem, and we created partnerships in the distribution. The distribution is public financing. I was going to say it earlier, and now it's the time to say it. In the first station, we've got 80% of public financing, whether it be from the state, with DECIL, or call for projects at the ADEME, the department, the region, and CDEV, who also pays their share. At Sable d'Olonne, that was the second call for project. We weren't the winner of that call for project, so we were only financed up to 30%. So it's CDEV that financed this, but it's a local elected officials that wanted to participate. But the CDEV invested a huge part. And for vehicles, for the last call for project, we were able to get about 25% of financing for these vehicles for all of our private-public partners. So we assist all of the stakeholders to find financing on this subject. To be clear, it's companies that you help to create an application to obtain financing to purchase these vehicles. Yes, we've got companies, for example, for logistics, semi-trucks. We do a lot of prospecting on this subject. We teach a lot about this. We give a lot of training about the challenges for this, and we also talk to local politicians and tell them they've got to take the risk. They've got to have this desire to decarbonate their city centers, and that have to decide to do this. But for them, the dossier, the application that has to be filled out, it's really difficult for some of these people. So it's CDEV that takes over this role, and we fill out this application. And what are your results? Well, the call for project METIF, which is from the ADEME, via the METIF application, we were able to get just about 25% of financing for all of the vehicles deployed. Thank you so much. Same question for Christelle Guillaume from the AREC. What types of financing, how does that work with your private partners? So the AREC is an investor in these projects. It's a way for the region to invest in these production and distribution infrastructures. And then we try to get financing from Europe, national, via the ADEME. The region also does help in terms of subsidies. Most recently, they voted in October an AMI to densify the amount of stations that would be in the region. I think that'll start in May, June, and that'll allow us to identify project carriers that could create stations. The objective being to assist them or to give them help, whether it be in financing, depending on the size of the structure, but also to help them to find European financing. So constraints are linked to a call for projects. And so among the larger European corridors or urban milieu, we've got to look at all this. You can go online, you can look at the site of the region, the website, or you can send us a question and we'll be able to be more clear on this. Everything's online for the European CEF AFI. It's a European call for projects, which is the famous inter-mechanism for Europe, connecting mechanisms for Europe. So that's how we can accompany some of these businesses in infrastructure, but for usage, another AMI of the region for 2025 is going to subsidize a part of the vehicles for professional use. Kind of like the ADEME had suggested doing so. So take over the extra cost as compared to diesel vehicles, which is a substantial help, and that allows us to ensure that the cost of the hydrogen vehicle is covered, that extra cost at least, as compared to a diesel. And this subsidy is for who? Companies, local authorities, depending on the size, it can cover the extra cost from 25 to 50%. And same, all of the stakeholders that are, whether they be distributors, we're here to assist you so that they can also make an application for any type of vehicle. None of this is for personal usage, obviously professional usage, whether it be fuel cell or combustible engine, semi-trucks, heavy goods trucks, intensive use vehicles. There's Fenwick, which are forklifts, I believe.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Buses, coaches. Béziers, we've got the station that's going to open next year, which is the winner from a call for project from ADEME. We'll have 13 or 15 coaches that are going to start being put into use in 2025. And just to end, that's the AMI of the ADEME, but for vehicles that will be able to fill up an EPOL, there's another subsidy that was attributed via the ADEME at that time, and that allows people to get a financing rate that's really interesting, whether it's to acquire a vehicle or to lease a vehicle. We know that companies like Itsetco have some professional vehicles that can be leased, and that can be very, very helpful to increase usage. Mathieu Coppert, do you have anything to add about some of the financial aid available for purchasing or distribution? No, I think everything's been said, notably by my colleagues when it comes from the help from ADEME, the local banks, which is a precious resource for the deployment of hydrogen. In France Hydrogen, we're activists so that the state will bring funding. You can imagine at the moment it's really complicated, but we're militant so that there are more and more funding to accompany certain parts of the industry to buy vehicles, but also to decrease the price of hydrogen, as we spoke about with the famous TERs. I don't know if you know this expression. It's an incentive tax to use renewable energy in transportation and mobility, and that it would allow us to decrease the cost of the kilo of hydrogen from 47 euros. Why are you talking to it in conditional? Isn't it already applied? It hasn't been applied yet. It's been voted by there's a decree, but it hasn't been applied yet. So we're lacking the decrees for application. Some political maneuvering remains to be done, and it will be 4.7 euros for kilo of hydrogen, which gets us a little bit closer, not necessarily as competitive as we would be with diesel, but get a little closer to diesel. When you're giving numbers like 15 euros the kilo of hydrogen, we're not including this financing. But no, not at all, but that would certainly allow us to reduce the extra cost by 1/3. We're also talking about money all the time, but this is innovation. We're talking about it from an industrial point of view, but when we're talking about developing renewable energy or these infrastructure for charging or for refueling, these are public investments. We've got to launch this dynamics within our territory, and if the public it doesn't realize that, we don't want to use that as our message. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, everything we'll have done will allow us to have an industrial cost that's acceptable to everyone, and therefore will be competitive with other types of energy. Thank you. This is a fantastic conclusion, and we're going to finish on that. Are there any questions on all these different themes? You can raise your hand if you have a question. No?
Pas de questions. Alors,
no questions? Well, in that case, I'm going to ask one.
Au Maroc.
And then we're going to allow the Moroccan conference to begin. We spoke at length about mobility, but my question is the industrial side of things. There's renewable hydrogen to decarbonate industries. Can this allow us to finance production for mobility?
un usage complémentaire.
To have a complementary
À
usage.
qui je vais poser cette question?
Who should I ask this question? Who wants to answer?
Martinez Dynamics.
Crystal Martinez.
Dynamics, vous faites aussi de
Clairement, plus il y aura d'usage, enfin voilà, plus il y aura
Clearly,
d'usage,
the more we use
plus
it,
nos électrolyseurs
then more our electrolyzers will be powerful, more powerful, and then of course we'll find a more acceptable economic logic. So today we've really got to not talk about the ecosystem of mobility or industry, which each person on one side, we've got to at all costs bring these elements together to talk about hydrogen production for an entire region. And in one station, can we supply industrialists and trucks? Of course, I'm a hydrogen producer. I produce hydrogen, and from this hydrogen production, that can be for distribution stations, buses, trucks. I can also via a pipe. The industrial can come to me, or I can go to them via a pipeline for very specific types of trucks, very specific types of usage. Today we mustn't limit ourselves, and today when we're developing a project, and even an industrial project, the objective when we're answering the needs of an industrialist who's already using hydrogen in their process, but it's gray hydrogen, they need to create, decarbonate their hydrogen or create renewable hydrogen. This is a lot of power being used. Their needs are much higher. And tomorrow, thanks to all of this, we'll be able to add to mobility at more interesting prices, because we'll have projects that are 50, 60, 80, 100 megawatts. And of course, you must realize that the cost of the kilo of hydrogen coming from electrolyzer from 100 giga is less expensive than one coming out of one that is of 1 megawatt. So we've got to work on these potentially semi-centralized systems. We'll be able to bring all the usage together and not just talk about transport over here, mobility over here, or hydrogen over here. Thank you. Does one of you want to add anything to that? No, but I think that that was really, really well said, and I think that hydrogen is a way forward. Hydrogen mobility is a great opportunity for us. In the Occitanie region, we don't have a lot of big users, but we have a few. So that's one of the first possible usages. And you can also look at how hydrogen can substitute today's consumption for gas in the industry, and the uses for mobility, for electrical generation. So there's many services that hydrogen can assist, and that would create more clients.
Vous voulez poser une question?
Do we have a question?
Et également aussi les ISAF.
Also, we've got the ISAF,
une production industrielle de carburant,
which are industrial producers of sustainable carbon, and they're very big electrolyzers that allow us to produce hydrogen at a lower cost that can also be used for mobility. Thank you.
Je suis installateur photovoltaïque dans
I install PV solar panels,
j'avais une question
and I had a question
le
concerning
transport ferroviaire,
train transportation, whether it be for passengers or for freight. We didn't touch upon that. Is there?
Des clés sur ce sujet?
Do you have any ideas about this, Sergio? Is that a mature industry? Are there projects for the years to come?
Je sais pas si vous avez
And I don't know if you have any information on the profitability of this type of projects for train lines that are not electric. For example, where I live, we don't have that, and I think that's an important subject for the future. I'm going to talk on this one. These hydrogen trains exist. Some of them are already up and running in their Halstum, and they're running in Germany. And in 2025, they will also be in different regions. Some will be in Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, other in Bourgogne-Franche-Comté. I think that the Great East and Occitanie as well, we will have hydrogen trains. I don't think that any are planned up now in the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region. The technology, I don't know if we have enough, experience on this technology, but it certainly exists, and they're French trains from Halstom. And the question was to know if it was profitable on these non-electric lines. The first use of these hydrogen trains is going to be when the lines are not electric, because when they are electric, then hydrogen isn't necessarily pertinent. However, on the non-electric lines, this will be the heart of what our objective will be. And in the Occitanie region, for the green hydrogen plan, we're using it in the drag. We've got coaches, we've got buses, we've got trains. We've got 3 trains for local transportation, and they're hybrid, so they can either be electric or hydrogen. So they're hybrid, and that's something that the region is really committed to as well.
Merci.
Thank you. Is there one more question? No.
OK.
There is one here.
Question? C'est une question? D'accord. Rapidement, il nous reste 1 minute.
We have 1 minute, so quickly, please.
Au passage,
I did see these.
Édité par France Hydrogène.
J'ai vu sur une
I saw on one of the slides 1 kilogram of hydrogen for 100 kilometers. And here you're talking about 1 kilogram that costs less than €5. That's a problem for me because earlier you showed a slide where there was a vehicle.
Faut remettre votre casque.
Voilà.
Expliquez-moi
cette diapo.
You've got to explain that slide to me. So on the very first one, I indicated that this was an average. Careful, these are averages. The consumption of hydrogen for 100 kilometers, depending on the type of vehicle. So this is the average consumption. I want to highlight that. So, for example, here for the kilo, you're talking about personal use vehicles, and that's roughly, based on our experience from Parisian taxis, it's about 1 kilo of hydrogen for 100 kilometers driven. And so the 1 kilogram of hydrogen today costs roughly 10 to 15 euros per kilo. That's a very broad amount. So that gives you a ratio of how much it'll cost you to drive 100 kilometers with a hydrogen vehicle. And we're talking about a lightweight vehicle, a personal car, for example.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci. Eh bien, écoutez, je vous remercie.
I would like to thank you all.
Pour vos interventions, nous allons poursuivre cette table ronde avec le Maroc.
We are going to continue on with this roundtable with Morocco, but I'd like to applaud you first.
Vous pouvez laisser. Oui, vous pouvez laisser. Ah oui, vous pouvez les garder pour l'intervention. Alors. Mais il faut en laisser pour le monsieur. Non, mais tout le monde, c'est bon. Oui, oui. Donc, comme je vous le disais au début de cette table ronde, nous allons maintenant avoir une présentation du cluster Green H2 Maroc. Et j'invite à me rejoindre sur scène. Donc, alors, monsieur Pierre Benaïm, directeur adjoint à l'innovation de ADOC, donc l'agence de développement économique de la région Occitanie, et monsieur Mohamed Yahya Zniber. Vous êtes président du cluster Green H2 Maroc. Donc, vous allez nous faire un focus synthétique sur l'hydrogène renouvelable au Maroc. Alors, prenez une place, un micro, vous avez vos casques. Je pense que c'est bon ? D'accord.
Bien, bonjour à toutes et tous. Je vais être très bref parce que M. Zniber, qui nous fait l'amitié d'être là aujourd'hui, doit prendre un avion, donc va devoir partir à 16h45 précise. Simplement rappeler que l'histoire de l'Occitanie et du Maroc est une histoire maintenant ancienne, puisque nous avons un partenariat économique et institutionnel fort depuis un certain temps, et que nous avons souhaité renforcer donc notre collaboration sur le sujet de l'hydrogène. Et nous avons signé ce matin un accord de partenariat, un MOU, avec le cluster Green H2 que M. Zniber préside et dont il va nous présenter les principales activités. Ça nous semblait assez évident puisque nous avons des activités relativement proches avec la dynamique IDEO, notamment sur le volet de la chaîne de valeur de R&D et industriel de l'hydrogène. Nous avons donc signé cet accord de partenariat dans lequel nous souhaitons engager un certain nombre d'actions sur les partenariats industriels, les partenariats pour la recherche, la formation, des événements en commun, et essayer de faire en sorte que nos écosystèmes se cooptent. Donc on est ravis et très heureux de ce partenariat. Et je vous laisse maintenant la parole, Monsieur Sniber, en vous remerciant, vous et toute la délégation marocaine qui est venue nombreuse passer un peu de temps sur EnerGaïa, et vous pouvez les rencontrer si vous êtes intéressés pour d'éventuels partenariats avec eux suite à la présentation que vous allez nous faire. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Merci de me recevoir dans cet entretien et cette conférence intime. Alors je commencerai juste pour rappeler ce qu'était la feuille de route marocaine pour l'hydrogène vert. Alors tout ce qui est en pointillé représente un peu la mise en bouche, hein, cette partie développement, cette partie réduction des coûts qui sont étudiés tout au long du parcours. Et nous estimons qu'au Maroc, ça serait plutôt vers 2030 que l'on ferait de l'hydrogène un produit transformé en dérivés, notamment l'ammoniac. Pourquoi l'ammoniac? Parce que nous avons le plus gros consommateur mondial d'ammoniac au Maroc, en l'occurrence l'Office chérifien des phosphates, qui est fabricant évidemment d'engrais et qui va être concerné par la décarbonation dès 2026. Ensuite, nous estimons qu'entre 2030 et 2040, on irait plutôt vers les synthetic fuels, alors que le transport, pour nous, est quelque chose qui viendrait plus tardivement et qui concernera aussi bien l'aviation que le transport maritime, mais précédé par les gros transports au niveau terrestre. La partie export, concerne évidemment tout ce qui est ammoniac, hydrogène sous sa forme initiale. Et puis, voilà, le domestique pour nous est quelque chose qui viendrait beaucoup plus tard. Alors, comme vous le voyez, la chaîne de valeur de l'hydrogène est plus riche quand on passe à la partie hydrogène vert. On voit qu'un certain nombre de process s'ajoutent dans la chaîne de valeur. Et donc ça, c'est intéressant parce que ça permet d'avoir un ensemble d'activités diversifiées, notamment les énergies renouvelables où on peut aller de la biomasse, nucléaire, nous on n'a pas encore, mais ça fait partie de la chaîne, le solaire, l'éolien. Et ensuite, vous avez la partie dessalement qui évidemment va jouer un rôle très important chez nous. D'abord du fait du manque d'eau dans des pays comme les nôtres. Et puis, ça permet, toute cette chaîne permet en fait une diversification industrielle qui est très intéressante pour le Maroc, qui estime qu'il y a un vrai enjeu de création d'écosystèmes autour de la chaîne de valeur hydrogène. Alors, la chaîne de valeur hydrogène, évidemment, elle commence par les énergies renouvelables, qui sont la source la source essentielle. Au Maroc, on a un potentiel de l'ordre de 20 000 gigawatts au niveau solaire et de 6 000 gigawatts en éolien onshore. On démarre, après les énergies renouvelables, évidemment, et le passage par le traitement de l'eau par dessalement, on passe par des électrolyseurs. Et le programme marocain en électrolyse, c'est celui que vous avez sur le tableau, qui est décliné sur les 3 périodes de 2030 à 2050. Et puis vous avez en bas la partie dessalement d'eau qui est relative à ce qui se fera en électrolyse. Alors je rappellerai quand même, c'est des chiffres qui ont évolué depuis à peu près une année du fait des grands projets qui ont été lancés après l'offre Maroc qui a été formalisée. Donc c'est des chiffres qui sont appelés à augmenter. Je rappelle aussi que pour l'eau, le Maroc, du fait de ce problème de disponibilité de l'eau, utilisera essentiellement de l'eau dessalée. Cette eau dessalée n'impacte pas réellement le coût de l'hydrogène, puisqu'on a estimé que ça serait aux alentours de 1% du coût final de l'hydrogène. Donc ce n'est pas quelque chose qui est impactant sur le process. Ensuite, évidemment, vous avez la partie stockage, compression pour stocker l'hydrogène. Là aussi, sur la chaîne de valeur, nous estimons qu'il y a un ensemble de composants d'équipements qui peuvent faire l'objet au Maroc de fabrication locale et qui permettent aux PMI, PME marocaines et en partenariat avec nos partenaires européens de mettre sur place un certain nombre d'unités de fabrication de ces composantes. Il y a évidemment cette partie logistique qui est essentielle dans la chaîne de valeur. Et là, vous avez un graphe qui vous donne quels sont les moyens de transport qui pourront être utilisés en fonction des distances qui vont être parcourues pour transporter ces produits-là. Et puis là, c'est les usages avec à chaque fois les quantités de CO2 qui sont réduites dans le process. Alors, au Maroc aussi, on a cette sensibilité de faire bénéficier l'ensemble du territoire par l'écosystème hydrogène. J'ai tenu à faire ça parce que ça permet de montrer que si dans les régions du sud du Maroc, là où les coûts sont les plus bas en termes de production d'électricité, il y a d'autres régions marocaines où la fabrication d'équipements, voire de dérivés de l'hydrogène dans la chimie verte, peuvent s'avérer extrêmement intéressantes. Donc c'est pour ça que je parle de ce qu'on appelle l'hydrogène valley. Vous en avez certaines ici déjà en France. Et là, vous avez les 4 régions, où nous, on estime qu'il faut répartir toute la chaîne de valeur hydrogène et dérivés. Là, je donne simplement pour chacune des régions les ressources en électricité, les ressources en vent et avec les coûts qui peuvent être atteignables. Et encore une fois, ça, c'est des chiffres qui ont évolué et on estime qu'on va aller assez rapidement vers les $2 le kilo pour l'hydrogène. Bon, ça, c'est un focus sur la partie est du Maroc. L'avantage de cette partie, c'est qu'il y a aujourd'hui un port qui va démarrer bientôt. La construction est quasiment terminée. Je pense qu'en milieu de l'année 2025, il sera en fonctionnement. Alors, il a l'avantage d'être dans une région où il y a du soleil, il y a du vent aussi, mais surtout d'être ouvert à une partie exportation. Et il y a le pipe de gaz naturel qui allait de l'Algérie en Espagne, qui passe par cette région-là et qui pourrait être utilisé pour optimiser le transport éventuel d'hydrogène ou ammoniac ou autres dérivés. Alors, le Maroc estime qu'en 2030, il y aura à peu près 600 TWh en équivalent hydrogène. Et en 2050, 20 000 TWh. Et on a l'ambition de capter 22 TWh à horizon 2030, ce qui ferait ça 4% de la consommation mondiale, et environ 220 TWh, soit 1% de la production mondiale à horizon 2050. Alors, quel est le challenge pour construire cette régionalisation de la chaîne de valeur? Il faut diversifier les activités, les technologies. Il faut investir, il faut produire de la ressource humaine et il faut surtout avoir la bonne réglementation parce que ça, c'est quelque chose qui manque et il faut aller assez vite. Alors, j'ai essayé de faire une présentation très résumée, mais ce que je voulais montrer, c'est l'ambition qu'a le Maroc de développer plutôt la chaîne de valeur industrielle, parce que produire de l'hydrogène, les grands vont venir le faire, ça ne pose pas de problème. Mais par contre, qu'est-ce qu'on crée autour? Et tout le problème est là. On estime que les PMI d'ailleurs, même en France, devraient jouer un rôle très très important dans la construction et la fabrication des équipements, des composants d'équipements qui vont aller dans les différentes parties de la chaîne de valeur. Et c'est pour ça que nous, on a cette ambition d'être vraiment sur le développement de l'écosystème industriel. Et nous avons défini un certain nombre de programmes. Le cluster lui-même joue ce rôle, puisque d'abord par sa dénomination, c'est un cluster industriel. Donc il est là pour promouvoir le développement d'industries autour de l'écosystème hydrogène. Voilà. Alors je m'excuse, j'ai essayé d'être très rapide.
Mais c'était parfait. Vous voyez, il est 16h44. Voilà. Donc ça me laisse une minute pour vous remercier, donc Monsieur Znibert, pour cette présentation du cluster marocain et de toutes les ambitions marocaines en matière d'hydrogène renouvelable. Et puis j'en profite pour remercier également Pierre Benaïm, qui vous a introduit donc, pour l'agence de développement économique ad hoc. Et puis également Bernard Gilabert qui a ouvert cette table ronde pour le compte de la région, puisque vous en êtes le monsieur hydrogène de la région auprès de la présidente Carole Delga. Et nos 4 intervenants, Christelle Martinez donc pour Hynamix, Christelle Guillon pour la REC, Antonin Charon pour le CIDEV et Mathieu pour France Hydrogène. Voilà, c'était passionnant.
Merci.
Très serré, mais j'espère que vous avez appris des choses.
Je voulais simplement dire que le directeur général du cluster est là, donc il pourra répondre aussi à un certain nombre de questions, et aussi les membres de la délégation qui arrivent d'horizons divers de l'industrie marocaine sont là pour les 2 ou 3 jours, et donc ils pourront compléter ce que j'ai essayé de dire ça brièvement.
Merci, merci à la délégation marocaine pour d'être ici. Et puis voilà, effectivement, s'il y a des questions. Merci beaucoup et bon vol alors. Donc voilà, vous avez, si vous voulez poser des questions aux personnes de la délégation marocaine qui sont devant, vous pouvez peut-être vous approcher. La table ronde, elle va être terminée maintenant, mais je vous invite à aller les rencontrer.